The Canyon Road Gallery was my sanctuary, a testament to 2 decades of sacrifice. Each canvas held a piece of my soul, especially Desert Bloom, priced at $20,000. I was adjusting its gallery light when I heard a familiar, cutting voice. "Elias, is that you?" I froze. Turning, I saw them, my parents, looking older but with the same familiar disdain in their eyes. My mother's gaze flicked from my face to the small plaque beside the painting. Her jaw went slack. "20,000?" she whispered, the words laced with a disbelief that felt like a slap across my face. My father just stared, his face a mask of stone-cold shock. The war I'd won had just begun. My father, Richard Vance, was a man carved from granite and ambition. A corporate lawyer who measured life in quarterly earnings and saw my passion for art as a fundamental flaw, a financial liability. My mother, Eleanor, was his loyal echo, her approval a prize I'd long stopped trying to win. For them, a son with paint-stained hands was a source of private, potent shame. I was 18 when my father threw my sketchbook in the trash. "Stop this foolishness, Elias," he'd commanded, his voice as cold as a boardroom. "Art is a worthless hobby, not a career. You'll starve." Those words became the fuel that drove me for 20 years. And now, they stood before my life's work, the worthless hobby that had built my company, Vance Fine Art. My mother finally broke the suffocating silence, her voice a thin, reedy thing. "You never told us," she accused, as if I owed them an inventory of the success they'd never believed in. My father's eyes, however, weren't on me. They were still fixed on the price tag, doing the cold, hard math he understood so well. He looked betrayed, not by my silence, but by his own colossal miscalculation. "You never told us," my mother repeated, her voice trembling with a hurt I knew was manufactured for the occasion. A short, bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Told you what, Mother? That you were wrong? I sent you an invitation to my first gallery show 10 years ago. It came back unopened." My father's jaw tightened. That was the look, the exact expression he wore across the polished mahogany of our dining room table the night I truly left. I was 21, home from a state university I was paying for with landscaping jobs. I'd brought my first real commission, a small portrait that a professor had paid me $500 for. I thought, with the breathtaking naivete of youth, that a tangible result, actual money, would finally breach his fortress of disapproval. I can still feel the suffocating silence after I presented the check. My father hadn't even glanced at the portrait. He'd simply pushed his plate away, folded his hands as if closing a hostile negotiation, and delivered his ultimatum. "This is not a discussion, Elias," he'd said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You will drop this. You will enroll in the law school we have selected. We will pay for it. You will follow the path we have provided for you, or you will leave this house and be cut off. Completely." I looked at my mother. She was staring at her napkin, pleating it into a tiny, perfect square, her silence a blade twisting in my gut. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her non-choice was her choice. "So that's it?" I'd asked, my own voice shaking with a rage that surprised me. "A life I hate, or nothing?" "That is the choice," he confirmed, his face unreadable stone. I stood up, the legs of the chair scraping a violent protest against the hardwood floor. I looked from his cold expression to her averted gaze. There was nothing for me in that room. "Then I choose nothing," I said, and walked out. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't look back. That night, the frigid New Mexico air felt like the first breath of a new life. It was a brutal, unforgiving freedom, paid for with years of ramen noodles, freezing studio apartments, and the gnawing, terrifying fear that he had been right all along. I painted through the doubt. I painted through the hunger. Every single brushstroke was an act of rebellion. Now, standing here in the warmth of my own gallery, surrounded by the spoils of that war, I saw them not as parents, but as relics. Relics of a life I'd narrowly escaped. My father finally cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie. The shock in his eyes was being replaced by something else. Calculation. He was shifting from stunned father to corporate strategist. "Elias," he began, his voice attempting a tone of reason. "Perhaps we were hasty. This is clearly a viable enterprise." The word enterprise hung in the air, a cold, transactional insult to my soul's work. A viable enterprise? I echoed, my voice dangerously soft. I stepped closer to Desert Bloom, placing a protective hand on the thick wooden frame. "You called it a worthless hobby. I believe your exact words were, 'You'll starve.' Tell me, Father, does this look like starving to you?" My father's face didn't register shame. It registered annoyance. "Don't be theatrical, Elias. It was a calculated risk, and you were a poor one. The fact that you succeeded doesn't make my initial assessment wrong. It makes you an outlier. An anomaly." The words were so perfectly him, so devoid of emotion, that they almost took my breath away. He wasn't apologizing. He was reevaluating an asset. I was no longer a failed investment. I was a surprising growth stock, and he was the venture capitalist who'd passed on the first round of funding. "So this is my audit?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "You're here to check the books on the son you wrote off?" "Richard, stop," my mother interjected, placing a manicured hand on my father's arm. She turned to me, her eyes glistening with practiced tears. "Elias, please. This isn't about money. It's about us. About family. All those years, I thought about you every day." Quote, a memory, sharp and cold as an icicle, pierced through the curated warmth of the gallery. I was 22, shivering in a tiny, unheated studio in Taos. It was my birthday, my first one entirely alone. I had $2 to my name and was eating a can of cold beans for dinner. I'd stared at the payphone down the street for an hour, my fingers numb, desperate just to hear her voice. I finally called. "Collect." The operator asked who was calling. I said my name. And then I heard the click. She hadn't even waited to hear if I was okay. She'd just hung up. "Every day?" I repeated, the two words dropping like stones in the quiet gallery. "Did you think of me the day you hung up on my collect call? Or the Christmas I spent working a double shift at a diner so I could afford turpentine? You didn't think of me, you buried me." Her face crumpled, the manufactured grief giving way to genuine shock. She had forgotten. To her, it was a minor inconvenience, a blip. To me, it was the day I knew I was truly an orphan. My father, ever the strategist, saw his wife's emotional appeal failing and changed tactics. "This is unproductive," he stated, his gaze sweeping across the other paintings in the room, his mind clearly adding up the price tags. "Look, Elias, you've built something here. It has potential. But you're an artist. You don't understand business, not really. With my guidance, we could franchise this. Vance Galleries. We could take it national." The audacity was stunning. He wasn't here to reconnect, he was here for a hostile takeover. He wanted to slap his name on my victory, to absorb my 20 years of struggle into his portfolio. He wanted to own the success he'd tried so hard to prevent. "Your guidance?" I laughed, a raw, ugly sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Let me be perfectly clear. The best guidance you ever gave me was showing me the door. You taught me that my life's work was only valuable if it had a price tag you approved of. Well, you see the price tag. But you seem to have missed the plaque next to it." I tapped the small metal plate. "It says Vance Fine Art. My name, not yours. This isn't a family business. It's my business. And you two are not welcome here." My words hung in the air, a final, definitive severing. My mother flinched as if struck, her mouth opening and closing with no sound. But my father didn't move. The calm that settled over his features was far more terrifying than any rage. It was the placid surface of a frozen lake, hiding a deadly, unseen depth. He smoothed the front of his expensive suit jacket, a small, deliberate gesture of control. "Very well, Elias," he said, his voice a low, even hum. It was the voice he used for depositions, devoid of emotion, designed to disarm and dissect. "You've made your position clear." He didn't look wounded. He looked analytical, like he was observing a fascinating if predictable chemical reaction. He turned to my mother. "Eleanor, we're leaving." My mother, however, seemed incapable of movement. "Richard, we can't just—" "We can, and we will," he cut her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. He then fixed his gaze back on me, a flicker of something almost like admiration in his cold eyes. "You have my fire, I'll grant you that. But fire is volatile. It needs to be managed, contained. Left untended, it consumes everything around it, including itself." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne was a ghost from my childhood, a smell I associated with disappointment and closed doors. He glanced around my gallery, at the track lighting, the polished floors, the culmination of my life's work. "This is a beautiful setup," he conceded, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But the art world is small. The business world is smaller. Reputations are fragile things. Contracts have clauses. Landlords have lawyers." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "You've built your little kingdom on an island, Elias. It's a long swim back to shore." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. A reminder of his power, his reach, his world. A world of leverage and consequence that I had so proudly abandoned. Just then, the gallery's chime announced a new visitor. A wealthy-looking couple, patrons I recognized, stepped inside, their eyes immediately drawn to Desert Bloom. My father's composure was flawless. He gave them a polite, meaningless nod, the perfect picture of a gentleman browsing an art gallery. He turned back to me, his face an unreadable mask. "Enjoy your success," he said, the words perfectly civil, yet carrying the weight of a curse. He placed a firm hand on my mother's elbow, and without another look, steered her towards the door and out into the fading Santa Fe light. I stood there, motionless, the echo of his words chilling the warm air. The couple began murmuring their admiration for my painting, but I barely heard them. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't argued. He had simply reminded me that the world was still his, and I was just living in it. The $20,000 price tag suddenly felt less like a victory and more like a target. The couple, the Hendersons, drifted closer, their hushed tones a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. "It's magnificent, Elias," Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes fixed on the vibrant crimson at the heart of Desert Bloom. "It feels triumphant." A wry smile touched my lips. "It was meant to." My father's chilling words still hung in the air, a toxic vapor. "It's a long swim back to shore." I forced myself back to the present, back to the role of gallerist, of artist. I discussed the layering technique, the way the light played on the textured oils, the story of the lone flower defying the harsh desert. An hour later, Mrs. Henderson was signing a check. $20,000. The tangible proof of my success, the very thing my father had worshipped and despised, was now in my hand. But as I watched them leave, the triumph she'd seen in the canvas felt like a distant memory. The gallery, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a glass house, and I could hear the stones being gathered outside. That night, sleep was a battlefield I lost repeatedly. Every shadow seemed to hold my father's silhouette, every creak of the old building his calculating footstep. The next morning I was at the gallery before sunrise, fueled by coffee and a gnawing anxiety. I needed to work, to lose myself in the familiar scent of turpentine and oil paint. But just as I stretched a new canvas, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Abernathy Properties, my landlord." "Elias." Marcus Abernathy's voice was clipped, stripped of its usual folksy warmth. We'd always had a good relationship. He was a retired rancher who'd admired my grit. Got your file in front of me, just doing a review. A cold dread trickled down my spine. A review? Is there a problem, Marcus? Quote, business, he said, the word sounding foreign and harsh in his mouth. Section 14B of your lease agreement, the premises repurposing clause. We're exercising it. I felt the blood drain from my face. I vaguely remembered the clause. A piece of boilerplate legalese I'd skimmed over 5 years ago, desperate for a foothold on Canyon Road. Repurposing? What are you talking about? My lease is good for another 2 years. The clause allows the landlord to terminate the agreement with 30 days' notice if a more financially advantageous offer for the property is presented, he recited, his voice flat, as if reading from a script. We've received such an offer, a national retailer. They're willing to pay triple your rate. My hand tightened on the phone. It was happening. It was happening this fast. My father hadn't wasted a single night. A national retailer, I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. This wouldn't have anything to do with a man named Richard Vance, would it? Silence. A long, damning pause that was more potent than any confession. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus finally mumbled. But the lie was flimsy, pathetic. It's just business, Elias. The notice is being messengered over today. You have 30 days. The line went dead. I sank into my chair, the phone slipping from my grasp. 30 days. He was going to gut me, evict me from my own victory. My father wasn't just trying to hurt me, he was trying to erase me. He knew losing this gallery space wasn't just about losing a building. It was about severing my connection to the art community, tarnishing my reputation, and forcing me to start over, this time with the public humiliation of failure. It was a corporate execution. For a moment, pure, unadulterated panic seized me. I saw it all collapsing. The years of work, the reputation, the life I'd bled for, all dismantled by a single phone call from a man who saw my life as a hostile takeover. You're an artist. You don't understand business. Asterisk. His voice echoed in my head. And that's when the panic stopped. The fear didn't vanish, but it crystallized. It turned from a hot, messy flood into a single sharp icicle of fury. He was right. I didn't understand his business. I didn't operate in a world of hostile clauses and backroom threats. He was trying to drag me onto his battlefield, a place of lawyers and contracts where he held all the power and I would be bled dry. He expected me to fight him there. He expected me to lose. But he'd made one colossal miscalculation. He'd forgotten what I am. I'm not a businessman. I'm a storyteller. My canvases tell stories. My gallery tells a story. My entire life is a story of defiance. He thought he could control the narrative by controlling the real estate. I was about to show him that the most valuable real estate in the world is a story that captures the public's imagination. My father's weapon was money. Mine would be my truth. I walked over to my laptop, my movements now precise and deliberate. I didn't search for lawyers. I searched for journalists. Specifically, one journalist. Isabella Rossi. Her column in Art World Quarterly was legendary. She was brilliant, feared, and had a known disdain for the corporate commodification of art. She'd built her career championing the underdog and exposing the wolves. I found her direct contact information through a network I'd cultivated over 20 years, a network built on mutual respect, not leverage. I took a deep breath and dialed, my heart hammering against my ribs not with fear, but with a cold, thrilling resolve. She answered on the second ring. Rossi! Ms. Rossi, my name is Elias Vance. You don't know me, but I have a story for you, I began, my voice steady. It's about how a $20,000 painting on Canyon Road just started a war with one of the most powerful corporate lawyers in the Southwest. It's a story about art, family, and a hostile takeover. The twist? The lawyer is my father. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. I heard the faint sound of typing, then a hum of interest. "Go on," she said. I laid it all out for her in a small, quiet coffee shop far from Canyon Road. The scent of roasted beans was a welcome change from the chemical bite of anxiety. Isabella Rossi didn't take notes. She just watched me, her dark eyes missing nothing, her focus so intense it was like being X-rayed. I told her everything. The sketchbook in the trash. The ultimatum at the dining room table. The collect call that ended in a click. The unopened invitation to my first show, which I'd brought with me, a decade-old wound preserved in cheap paper. Finally, I told her about the eviction notice. When I finished, she took a slow sip of her espresso. "It's a powerful story, Elias, a tragedy. But right now, that's all it is. Your word against his." "It's the truth," I said, my jaw tight. "The truth is a beautiful thing. But it's not always a weapon," she countered, her voice sharp but not unkind. "Your father, Richard Vance, is not a man who loses in the court of public opinion. He'll paint you as emotionally unstable, vindictive. He will produce a dozen character witnesses who will talk about his civic virtues. He will bury you in affidavits. So what do? Just let him?" A ghost of a smile played on her lips. "Of course not. We don't fight him in his arena. We don't talk about feelings. We talk about facts. He's using a shell corporation, a subsidiary of a national retail developer, to make the offer on your gallery space. The developer is a major client of his law firm." I stared at her. "How did you?" "I made a few calls while you were driving over," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "That's the hook. Not my dad was mean to me. The hook is, power broker lawyer uses corporate muscle to evict artist's son from viral success gallery. One is a family squabble. The other is an abuse of power. That's my story." She leaned forward, the intensity back in her eyes. "But I need one more thing. Your landlord, Marcus Abernathy. Will he talk?" I thought of Marcus's strained voice on the phone, the shame beneath the gruff words. "He's a good man caught in a bad position. I don't want to ruin him." "I won't," Rossi promised. "I just need a whisper, an anonymous source confirming he was pressured. Can you get me that?" I pulled out my phone, a new kind of resolve hardening in my chest. I called Marcus. I didn't threaten or plead. I simply told him that I was going to fight, and that a journalist from Art World Quarterly was going to expose the corporate shell game my father was playing. I told him he could be an anonymous footnote, or he could be the man who let a titan like Richard Vance use him to crush a small business. I heard him sigh, a long, weary sound. "I never liked that man's handshake," he said, his voice low. "Felt like a snake curling around my wrist. Tell your journalist friend, tell her to look into the timeline of the offer. It was made less than 12 hours after your parents visited your gallery. Ask her if that seems coincidental." He hung up. I relayed the message. Rossi nodded, a grim satisfaction on her face. "That's all I need." 3 days later, the article dropped. It wasn't just in Art World Quarterly. Rossi had syndicated it. It was everywhere. The headline was "A Masterpiece of Controlled Aggression, The Price of Art, How a $20,000 Painting Triggered a Corporate War on Santa Fe's Canyon Road." The story was a clinical demolition. Rossi laid out the facts with surgical precision. My 2 decades of struggle, the sudden success of Desert Bloom, my father's visit, and less than 24 hours later, the eviction notice from a shell company tied directly to his firm. She quoted anonymous sources from the Santa Fe art scene who praised my work and character. She quoted Marcus's off-the-record comment about the timeline. She even included a high-resolution photo of the unopened invitation I had given her. Its postmark, a stark testament to years of indifference. My personal story wasn't the centerpiece. It was the human cost of my father's corporate brutality. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. My phone began to melt. Local news stations, national art blogs, even mainstream newspapers. The narrative was irresistible. The underdog artist, the corporate Goliath father, the ultimate betrayal. My gallery, with its 30-day death sentence, became a pilgrimage site. People came not just to see the art, but to bear witness. They bought prints. They bought smaller originals. They offered words of support, their eyes filled with a righteous anger on my behalf. My story had become their story. By noon, I received an email. It wasn't from my father, it was from a senior partner at his firm. It was a cease and desist letter thick with legal threats, accusing me of defamation, and I didn't even read the whole thing. The legalese was a smokescreen, the threats hollow. It was the roar of a wounded animal, trapped and lashing out. I forwarded the entire email to Isabella Rossi with a single line, "Fuel for the fire." Her reply came back in minutes. "They just confirmed our story. I'm already drafting the follow-up. Power broker firm attempts to silence artist's son with legal threats." The next 24 hours were a blur. Rossi's follow-up piece detonated online. The national retailer my father had courted released a public statement expressing their, quote, unwavering support for the arts community and announcing they were reevaluating their expansion strategy in Santa Fe. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. My father's partners, men who lived and died by their firm's pristine reputation, were now facing a public relations nightmare of his creation. He had miscalculated not just me, but the court of public opinion. He'd brought a knife to a gunfight, and the whole world was watching. The inevitable call came that evening. I let it ring twice before answering, stepping into the quiet back room of my gallery. "The notice is being rescinded," Richard said. No greeting. His voice was ice, brittle with a fury he could barely contain. "The developer has withdrawn its offer." "I know," I said calmly. A pause, thick with unspoken rage. "You think you've won," he hissed. "You've dragged our family name through the mud. You've jeopardized my firm. For what? A painting? For your petty, childish revenge?" "No, Father," I said, looking at my own reflection in the dark gallery window. "I did it for me. I did it to prove that my life, my work, isn't an asset on your balance sheet. It's not something you can acquire or liquidate." "You're a fool," he spat. "And you're a businessman," I replied, a profound sense of finality settling over me. "And you just made a very bad deal. Goodbye, Richard." I hung up before he could respond, severing the connection for the last time. A moment later, my phone buzzed again. It was Marcus Abernathy. "It's over, Elias," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. "They pulled out. The gallery is yours, for as long as you want it." I thanked him and ended the call. I didn't feel euphoric. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet. The war was over. He hadn't apologized, and he never would. But looking around my gallery, at the canvases that held 20 years of my soul, I realized he didn't have to. His approval was never the prize. The freedom from needing it was, and that was a victory. Has a family member ever called your passion a worthless hobby? I'd love to hear what it was and how you handled it in the comments.